Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexis Alvarez, and I'm the Director of Statewide Training at Florida Legal Services. I'm very excited to be here with you today to talk about an important subject, solitary confinement in the Sunshine State, exposing and combating the harms and realities of isolation in Florida's prisons. Before I move into housekeeping, the first thing that I'm going to do is put on our closed captions for anybody that might need a little bit of extra accessibility. All right, those captions have been enabled. If you're having any issue pulling them up on your end, please feel free to message me in the chat. As soon as I'm done going through the housekeeping and introductions before we get into our content, I will do what I can to help onboard you. But thank you again for joining us for this important subject. We're going to have a really great and eye-opening dialogue between folks in different experiences and from different fields and different points of view when it comes to solitary confinement. Housekeeping, the first thing I want to say is this is being recorded, and a copy of the recording is going to be sent to all of you who are here with us today, and that recording will come to you in an email from Zoom within 24 hours after this event. The recording will also be posted on multiple YouTube channels in order to continue this discussion and continue sharing this message. If you do not receive that email with the recording 24 hours after the event, you can email me directly. I've dropped my email address into the chat for those of you who might need, and you can reach out to me for anything. I am always happy to help. Second piece of housekeeping announcements is this was approved by the Florida Bar for CLE credit. Some folks might be here to learn more about solitary confinement in Florida's prisons. Some people might be here just for CLE. Hopefully all of you are here for both. You will receive that CLE code along with the copy of the recording, but I will also announce that CLE code at the end of today's presentation, and I will make sure to drop that into the chat as well. But don't worry, if you don't write it down or you don't get it fast enough, my email's in the chat. You can always reach out to me directly, and I will make sure you get your CLE code and your credits. Third piece of housekeeping announcements, questions and answers. This is a dialogue. We want to hear your thoughts and engage you as much as possible in the virtual vortex that we're in. So please don't be shy. Please drop your questions into the chat or the Q&A, preferably the Q&A if possible. That way at the end, we can engage you in the conversation and answer those questions that you might have. The final piece of housekeeping announcements I want to mention is you should already see a few things in the chat box that I dropped in earlier today. There is a link to our speaker bios. The reason that that's in the chat is we have so many amazing people on this panel, and there are so many amazing things to share about these folks that we want to get right into the content. So feel free to access that document to read more about the speakers who we have here today. Additionally, there is a resource list that is in the chat box. That resource list is compiled by all of our folks who are speaking here today, bits and pieces from each of the resources that they themselves value. So please feel free to check those resources out. I will also include that stuff with the recording and with the CLE. And I do see that someone mentioned that they're not seeing that stuff in the chat. Don't worry, I'll repost it as soon as I'm done talking here. Thank you for letting me know. And so with that being said, I think enough of the boring stuff. I know you're not here to listen to me talk about housekeeping. I'm going to turn it over to Christina for a little bit of moderation, maybe a little bit of extra introduction in some capacity. Again, I thank you all for being here. I thank our incredible speakers for being here. And Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And thank you everyone for participating in this webinar. Today we have a great panel of experts. We have Mr. Pri Shelton, Mr. Stephen Mangual, Ms. Andrea Costello, and Professor Terry Coonan. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to be discussing the realities of solitary confinement in Florida to help bring awareness to this issue and current advocacy efforts going on in Florida. And this panel is hosted by Florida Legal Services and the Florida State University Public Interest Law Center. My name is Christina, and I'm a law student at FSU and a student advocate in our Juvenile Solitary Confinement Project. This project seeks to abolish solitary confinement for young people and really everyone in Florida. And this year, our project, in conjunction with our statewide solitary confinement work group, we drafted 2 bills that were sponsored by Senator Bobby Powell. And one of these bills would limit solitary confinement for anyone in Florida to 8 hours and provide for resources in counseling instead of isolation. Our second bill would ask the Office of Program Policy and Government Accountability to conduct a study on the use of solitary confinement in Florida prisons. And we are hoping to continue the fight for this legislative advocacy in the years to come. And if you would like to learn more about these bills, they are in the resources document that is posted in the chat. So I think we're ready to get started into the panel. I have some questions to focus on each panelist, but if another panelist has a perspective, feel free to jump in or let me know. I would like to start with Mr. Pri Shelton, if you're ready to go. If you could please introduce yourself and talk about your background related to this issue and your current role at the Joseph House.
Okay, my name is Pri Shelton. It's Pri Shelton, but I go by Pri. I was released from prison after doing 22 years in November 29th of 2021. I stayed at the Joseph House from the time Rachel, our amazing social worker, and Father Dustin, they picked me up and I left Santa Rosa CI to Joseph House. And I stayed there 8 months. It's just, I can go on for 2 days straight to tell you how much the Joseph House did for me, but we're not here for that. But during that time that I was incarcerated, I knew I was going to have somebody help me like the Joseph House, because I did 22 years and almost 11 of that was done on solitary confinement. So once you do that amount of time in solitary confinement, I don't care. People always tell me, oh man, you don't seem like the type of person that did so much time, but trust me, I deal with stuff every day. I had to get used to something that's terrible, a way of living. I had to adapt to it at 18 years old. So I went in at 18 and got out at 40. I've been living in a place that's so so bad on every level that it's impossible for you to come out of there not affected by it, not after doing over 2 decades. So when I got out, it was a lot of things. I mean, culture shock is just that's an understatement. Like, it was so much that I couldn't grasp. And now I'm a community educator at the Joseph House. I work with dudes because I've been through it. So it's more than sympathy. I can have empathy because I know what they've been through. And we see the guys going through that now, what I went through. Because some of these guys are coming out, we get them straight from CM, just like me. I've been to CM 6 times in my 22-year period. So, but some of these guys come from CM, right from CM. So you're coming right from CM, which is closed management for those who don't know, straight to the world. I mean, it's so many people that's so many. Everybody I know that got out, when I got out, around the time I got out, or after me, is back in prison, including my son. I mean, it's that bad. Like it's because you have a person that's used to doing very bare minimum of anything in his life, because there's no programs in it. Are there programs? Yes, technically there are, but there ain't the programs in there to help people, and the programs they have are not good. We need programs. I am trying to initiate a program. I'm working on something, but we need programs that's helping guys getting out of prison. I mean, intricately focusing on that, because guys in there don't even know. Okay. I don't know what just happened.
You're back now, Pri. I think we can hear you if you want to try talking again.
Okay.
Yep, you're there.
I don't know where I got cut off at, but okay. So
You were talking about
me being
programs that you're
community
trying.
educator at the Joseph House, I'm definitely trying to get that program, but I don't want to put too much of that out there because that's something that's in the works and it's got a lot of stuff. But I'm just saying this is something that's needed. I promise you, a person that's getting out after doing so much time in confinement, because it's a mental thing. It ain't something, it's mental and it wears you down. But a lot of people don't know when they're getting out that they're messed up like that. You don't realize it if you got any sound of practical judgment until you are released and you out here and you seeing, you know, things, how people act and move. I mean, you can almost see some people get out, and even if I wasn't a person that been to prison, you could tell they out of prison because they out of sorts. They don't, you know, they don't know a lot of the things that's going on, and the things that they see in confinements, in these solitary confinements and CMs is another thing it affects your mental. You know how many people I've seen just, and me, including myself, because when you in confinement, you at the bottom of the gravel of life. There is nothing nobody can tell me. When I don't see them and I'm doing 2 and 3 years and behind,
You're in and out, Pri. Christina, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know what's.
Okay, that's all right. Christina, do
Hello.
you ask another question or try to, while Pri's trying to get situated with the Wi-Fi and everything?
Yeah, I could ask some questions to Stephen while we're working out some technical difficulties. Um, Stephen,
Okay. You can't hear me no more?
I can hear you. I think we're not getting video though.
Y'all can't hear me no more?
We can hear you now, Pri, and maybe it's better to keep the video off. Sometimes that's better for Wi-Fi. Do you want to try continuing
Okay.
without the video on? That way
Yeah,
you
so I was at the part about, yeah, so I was at the part where, like, you know, you're doing 2 and 3 years on CM, and it's just, this is the bottom of the barrel of life. You're already in prison, right? All right. So now you in prison, all right, on CM1. You behind 2 doors on Q Wing, Fort Lauderdale State Prison. You behind 2 doors. It gets hot back there. The police get mad because people yelling out the window. They turn the heat on in the summertime. Now they don't do this anymore because somebody said something and it got moved. But these was things I went through. Heat in the summertime when somebody else is acting up. The Zoss fans in the wintertime. Do you know how that's like having an AC on when it's 10 degrees outside? I mean, these are the things I went through. I've seen people say, before I left, before I left prison, my confinement wing, because of they didn't want to, neither one of the inmates wanted to be in the room with each other, but they still wanted, they still put him in there, and he was in there 2 days, and he wound up getting killed in his sleep by his other partner. I mean, by his roommate. You know what I'm saying? This is happened 2 months before I'm released. So I'm giving you, I can sit here for 10 years straight and just talk to y'all and give you a whole bunch of stories, and I still wouldn't be done. But I can tell you this, that's the last of what I'm leaving out with. So imagine the things in between there. You know, it's sad that they don't have anything that's working with dudes, guys that's getting out and helping them integrate back into society, because that's the number one thing why guys are going back, because they can't deal with it. We didn't really do nothing in prisons, definitely confinements. So when you get out and in the confinement, you've been sitting in that confinement doing nothing. I mean, you can read and write, or but most people don't do that. You're just sitting in there not doing anything, and then you get released to the street. Now, just say you don't have a Joseph House of people helping you. You got to get a job. You got to go to all these places. It's not going to, that's why they wind up going back. It's so simple. The problem is simple. The solution is what need to be dealt with. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you so much for talking about your experience and also how solitary can impact re-entry. If you want to give any more detail on how solitary confinement can impact reentry, or I'll open that up to the other panelists as well, if anyone would like to add.
Okay. So the some of the other I would say this. Yeah, you would need to we would need a program that's like attached or associated with some type of reentry. But, and you hear me, Christina, I'm talking about something that's focusing just on the inmates that's getting out of confinement. CMs, because it's a nice little bit. Trust me, you might be thinking right now that it's not, but it's a nice little bit. You know what I'm saying? It's a nice little. It's people getting. We have two. I don't know if the ones who know. We have two. One came yesterday, and we have another one coming in 2 weeks, coming off CM to the Joe's house. Like, people get off from CM all the time. I want to solely concentrate on that. There was a program that kind of concentrated on that, but it was concentrated more on getting the person integrated back to go to the compound, because that's a big thing. And I'll get into that later if we have time. Like, that's a big thing, because it's so mentally disturbing when you're on CM that it's a big thing going back to the compound. That's why I'm trying to start this program for helping guys get from CM to the real world, because the real world, you're doing them a disservice. They ain't gonna be it. They think they can do it. Trust me, I talk to guys almost every day in prison. They sit there, oh yeah, I can do it. And they get out here, they be like, whoa, yeah, you didn't know. They didn't know, Terry. They didn't know they had to do this and more. You got to go to work, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. Yeah, and you got roommate service in there. You're getting your 3 meals a day. You use the bathroom, you take 2 steps. I mean, you barely gonna go to rec. You barely gonna get a shower. They on CM. That's just the way it is. They gonna try to do showers once or twice a week, and if you miss them, they're gonna try to make you miss them, because they're gonna want your bed made. They're gonna want you, if they look in your room and see a pen on the ground. These are the little petty things that is messing with a person's mental. But while you're going through it, you don't know it. You don't know this is breaking you down, and people calling you dog and belittling you so long that you believe it. Like, you've been called and treated like nothing for so long that, hey, you don't believe there's people out here that actually care, that's trying to make a movement. We don't know it's Andrea out here. We don't know it's a Terry out here. We don't know it's a Steven out here. People in prison don't think y'all out here. They think everybody out here feels like they should stay in there, because that's what they promote. And even on the TVs, the news and stuff we're watching, we see the people that says, oh, they getting enough food in confinement, you should give them less. Them the people we see. So we're never gonna, people, I tell those guys all the time, I say, man, there are people out here that are in your corner, know you're being mistreated in here, care, and have a heart. You know what I'm saying? I say, I'm around these people all day. I'm not around the other ones. But let me stop right there before I get cut off again.
We have a few more minutes if you wanted to talk more about the transition from CM to the compound.
Well, it's just, you know, I can go on days for this, because I'm very passionate about it. Y'all see, I'm a very emotional character. I'm a Cancer. But I think it's the most devastating thing. Coming from CM confinement, and even some of the dudes that's, just say you've been on CM like me, you've been down a while, and you've been on CM a lot, you've been in confinement a lot, and just say you're not particularly coming out of confinement, that stuff still messed you up. I mean, it's already bad enough to be in prison, but that confinements, it gives you too much time to think. If you ever heard of it, I got something. If you ever heard of that, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can have too much time to think. So, and that goes into a negative reverse. So somebody like me, I'm an autodidact. Everything I've learned, I taught it myself. Whatever it was, I teach it to myself. That's what I do. Well, there ain't a lot of guys in prison like that. And I'm not saying this to toot my own horn or anything, but some guys gonna sit in prison try to get better at what they're in prison for. They'll sit back and they idolize the wrong things. They don't have any guidance. Maybe if the program was there, they'll have something to feed those thoughts, and then those thoughts can be manifested. Well, when you're sitting in the room and you just listen to your radio, or they got tablets now, and you listen to a little baby, he's talking about all this jewelry he got. And I want y'all to listen to me, because I'm breaking it down to the lowest denominator so you can understand it, because I've been there. I'm not talking about these guys and like throwing them out there. Like, I did this too. So you're looking at all these riches, these famous people got, because we have access to these, we can see them on the thing, and then you go to fantasize. All right. Now, this is somebody who's getting out. Remember, this is somebody who's getting out, who done been back and forth to CM confinements, but they are a person that's listening to this, and they about to get out of prison, and they go to thinking of all the things that they can have, not knowing, okay, how are you going to get that? They ain't gonna think of that. They're gonna think of possessing it, just having it. They ain't gonna think, oh, now you know what they're gonna do? In their mind, they're gonna think of the fastest, easiest thing to get money. You know how many guys, even some of the guys that coming out to the house, that's coming to the Joseph house, some of the guys that ain't fortunate to come to the Joseph house, but coming to are getting out, they tell me, oh, I'm gonna be a rapper. Oh man, I'm gonna get back up, man. I'm gonna go and try to play in the deep, like unrealistic things. Now, it's not that the rapping part is unrealistic. It's just, you're not just about to get out unless you had a super producer and that could, push it. I don't want them to get out with these false dreams, because those false dreams is the reason why they go back to doing whatever they was in prison for the first time, or something that's illegal, because they have to do it because they got to live. You know what I'm saying? Like, for me, for example, after I had moved out of the Joseph house, I was working. At that time I was working 2 jobs. I used everything I did illegally and I call it hustle. I still call it a hustle. I put it to work legally, because I said, if I can do all that I was doing then, I know I can do more now, and I just want to do it legal. So I didn't worry about doing nothing but working. But that's why I failed, because I got 2 full-time jobs and a little part-time job. I wasn't sleeping but 3.5 hours a day. So that messed me up, and it was a stumbling block. But what I noticed is the things I wanted, the things I was dreaming about, the things I'm telling you about, I know these guys are dreaming about before they get out. Well, I realized I can't get those things right now, and I definitely couldn't get them. That's why I have my own business out, because I definitely couldn't get them making $15 an hour. It just wasn't going to work. You can't even save up. My dream is to save up to get a house. You can't save up nothing making $15 an hour. It's just not going to work. So I wind up thinking and realizing these things out here. You know what I'm saying? But I had the best people in the world. God put the best people in the world around me when I got out. Rachel, Father Dustin, Sonia Cronin, just a bunch of the whole Joseph House community is like a love nest. And me, it was a perfect storm, me getting out. I had did 22 years. I've been locked up since I was 18. All this stuff comes out, and I did all this time in confinement. The only good thing I had going on my side, I knew I needed some help. I knew that my thinking, because everything I've done is kind of shaped around prison. Every situation I'm gonna be in, from my day, I'm speaking from here, getting out of prison. Every situation I'm about to be in, I'm gonna judge it off how I do my life. And what I've been doing 22 years, my whole adult life is in prison. So every instant, I wouldn't care if I spill over a paintball, if I run into a person that they bump into me. How I respond to it is going to be from something from prison, because that's all I know. So I had to redo all this stuff, because I can't talk to people out here like I talk to people in prison. It's a whole different jargon. Like you can't even. But people don't know that coming, especially in confinement people. Confinement, and we call them confinement babies. If you go to confinement a lot, or you go to see them a lot, they call you confinement baby. Like you kind of like a lost cause. Well, I was one of those, because I've been to CM, and you got to understand, I did 11 and close to 11 years total in solitary confinement. I remember one time and I told you guys I'm an autodidact. So how I learn a lot of stuff is I teach it. So I'm in the room by myself, and this one officer, he loved me. He was a good officer to me, but he was kind of like a real straight shooter. He didn't play, but he always come talk to me until he found out. He seen me talking to myself one day. I was teaching this English class because that's how I needed to learn. I wanted to learn the verb system. And you know, the English verb system is very big, and I was trying to learn everything. So I was just talking to myself, answering myself too. But that's how I retained the knowledge. That's how I did it. Well, this guy seen that, and from that point on, he always called me out my name, the sergeant. He treated me like everybody else. I used to work for him prior to that. That's why he always gave me extra trays. He always came by, hey, Shelton, you want some extra books or whatever? That's how he was. When he seen me doing that, I couldn't even explain it to him because if I were to try to explain it, it's gonna make me look crazier. So I just kind of like, but I said that to say, everybody ain't gonna do that. Like I used to sit in there for hours. You know what I'm saying? Hours doing things like that. And that helped me. And I still needed help. I talk to my counselor every Wednesday. You know what I'm saying? Like since I've been out, like these are real things that is not being addressed. I think people and not, and I'm glad we're here. I think people have a tendency to, even the ones that care, like they just think, okay, if he get out and if he gets out and does what he's supposed to do, he'll be good. Well, yeah, that is true, but what if he don't know what to do? What if I know guys that get out and they can't even function right. Like we can be out in the mall somewhere and we walking or something, but he'll go up and look out the window and like he's starstruck. Or I've done it. I've done it when I first came to the Joe's house. I looked out that beautiful window, but that was just a what's the name? But I've seen guys get out, my brothers get out, and they look totally lost because they seeing everything is moving so fast. They get frustrated because they can't work the phone because it's way smarter than them. I let them know, listen, it's smarter than me too and everybody else out here. We have problems with it, but things frustrate people when they can't do it because then they feel like, man, I'm dumb. I don't even know what I'm doing, and that's the thing. That's the program I have. It's going to tackle those key points that I've been talking to you about for the last 15 minutes. Like, I know the things that have to be targeted. And the blessing of working at the Joe's house, even though that's my alma mater, the blessing of it is that I'm able to still see the guys come in, and even though Father Dustin and they don't know I do this, but I monitor them and I watch what could be helped. Okay, that's something I dealt with too, and let me work on it from that point. Okay, what I can do to use that? You know what I'm saying? What I can do, and that's why when I'm there, I try to stay real close to the groups because I'm not. Listen, Father Dustin, the coolest priest in the world. I have never met a dude like a guy like that, especially a priest that's able to attract people, because those guys in there ain't gonna talk to the average people. I could promise you that. I never talked to priests before that or nothing because they come off wrong, and I have to tell them. I say that's not the way, but I didn't have to tell Father Dustin that. Father Dustin is one that you will want to talk to. He'll talk about anything. If you want to talk about God and Catholic, okay, he's gonna talk about that. But he gets you in good. He gets you in good, and then he's a likable guy. Well, even Father Dustin, some guys ain't gonna want to talk to him, period. They'll never talk to him. When we went into Santa Rosa, God made it possible where I've been able to go in and visit the CM wings. I mean, the very same wings I was in the dorm. And I've been so long on CM that I literally did a year and a half as a runaround, serving all 3 meals. That's like unheard of. That'll never probably happen again because it's the way it happened. But I sit on there. I sit in those wings, and I'm sitting there looking at these guys behind these doors, and I'm noticing that they are coming, like they rushing to me, like they the ones that know me and the ones that don't, they want to talk to me. good as I told you Father Dustin is, and I know a lot of people like him, it's some that they don't want to talk to him, and they ain't gonna never talk to him. You know what I'm saying? But they'll talk to me because they know me. They know, man, oh man, they were screaming. I had 2 roommates in one of the blocks. So they screaming at the top of their lungs, and the sergeant had to calm them down. He's like, listen, I know Shelton used to be here, but I got to calm down. But that I like that. I'm not gonna sit here and lie. I loved every minute of it because they swarmed me, and I just sat there and just talked to them. And I had a circle around me, and Father Dustin and Stephen, the other chaplain, they was just like around talking. I had a whole audience, but that's what they need, and I want to give them more, giving them me and a little more into the program that I'm talking about. Did that stay on that long? Okay, kind of good. Did y'all hear everything I said? Please tell me this is working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because ain't nobody saying that. Okay.
Well, thank you, Pri. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and how deeply CM can affect reentry. And also thank you for the work that you do at Joseph House. We know that y'all do really crucial work for the community.
Yeah, that's my thing. Listen, I couldn't join y'all yesterday. I was sorry about the little walkthrough, but I had job scheduled. God's been blessing me, and I had job scheduled even for this day. But I already told the person this is a giant house. I already told the person, listen, I have a Zoom meeting that's very important. So at 12 o'clock, I'm stopping. That'll be my lunch break or whatever. And then I'll get back. So that's why I'm in the truck right now. And it's Brad Johnson's house, the football player. This house is huge, but I'm wondering why the Wi-Fi keep going out. It's supposed to be good. But it's great to be here with you guys and see some of my friends, Terry. I think me and Steve.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time out of your busy schedule. Well, have a lot more questions. So if we have more time, I know there were some questions for you in the chat we might come back to during the Q&A portion. I definitely I have some questions for Stephen, but if you want to jump in as we continue the discussion, that would be great as well. So Stephen, could you please introduce?
Now y'all know I'm very loquacious. That's why I took all that time.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much. Stephen, could you please introduce yourself a little bit and your background related to this issue?
Okay. First of all, thank you. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for FSU Solitary Confinement Work Group that we've been meeting and speaking for, I want to say, at least over a year and a half now. And so it's been really a blessing to be a part of the coalition here, the students, the faculty, and the advocates, and all those different community-based organizations and other attorneys and legal folks that have been involved in this coalition and in this work, you know, for years before I came on here and moved to Florida. Thank you, my esteemed fellow panelists here. It's really grateful. I'm honored to be here with all of you, Pri Shelton and Andrea and Professor Terrence and Dr. Animo. It's really a honor to be here with you all. So Stephen Mangual, Justice Advocate Coordinator, LatinoJustice, PearlDeaf, here out of the Southeast region. I am the non-attorney advocate here, working under one of 6 pillars that guides the work for LatinoJustice, PearlDeaf. And my pillar, our pillar, is the criminal justice pillar. Up north is called prisons and policing, because a lot of the work that they do up north is around prisons and policing. And so the position is really unique because it is Florida based, because our office has been here in Orlando. The Southeast office has been here in Orlando, coming up on 10 years now. We've been an organization, you know, I'm proud to say, for since 1972. And so, you know, we've been around for 51 years. The organization is still guided by attorneys, what we call movement lawyers. Litigation is still the bread and butter. They're guided by 6 different pillars of work. Some of you, if you know LatinoJustice, you know we do immigration and voting rights work. We do, you know, Cap Leadership Institute. We have a Racial Justice Institute initiative. And then I mentioned mine, the criminal justice pillar. So, but my introduction to, you know, this work, and you're saying, and my background related to the issue is born and raised, Puerto Rican, born and raised in the Bronx, New York, 1971. My mom is, you know, came from Puerto Rico when she was young. So I'm first generation Puerto Rican. And so, learned Spanish as my first language, and growing up with two stepfathers, having our relationship with poverty, in New York City. My mom wound up suffering with her own issues. She had, and now I know that she has suffered from undiagnosed and untreated mental health issues. She had a problem with drugs and alcohol. So I'm a child of someone who came up in that way. And so by the time I was 10 years old, I was exposed to a lot of violence, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of personal violence, abuse, and that kind of stuff. And so my mom was one where when she would go through her issues, she would be very violent. And so when I was around 10 years old, she got into this altercation, and there was two women, they jumped her, there was a gun involved, and my mom wound up getting arrested. They called the police, and I remember, I'm like 10 years old. I remember this vividly. My two little sisters were sitting there crying. My stepfather is being held, by the police. There's all of these, police officers running through the house looking for the gun. They grab my mom, who was like 5'2", and they throw her against the wall. They handcuff her and they take her away. And I remember that vividly, and it really affected me. I'm 10 years old, changed my life, actually, changed all of our lives. Broke up the relationship. My mom, we had to move away. After that, I moved to, our block, what I call our block, the block where I spent, the next almost 11 years of my childhood. And so it's no surprise that I was already, involved in running from police and using drugs, dealing drugs, carrying guns and weapons, all by the age of 13. I remember I purchased my first weapon when I was 12 years old. And that was just the life that we had, and it was because of a lot of reasons. Poverty, all of the abuse I went through, my peers, we had peers that were also going through the same things, and so we were like, all we knew was violence and the hustle and the game and the street. And there was no interventions. Yes, there were people that we grew up with that had regular jobs that were going to their 9-to-5s, but they very rarely interacted with those of us who they saw as they walked past the hallways or across the streets, and we were outside acting a fool. And so I was arrested for the first time when I was 14 years old, and initially it was for boosting, trying to make some money, because before we got into the drug game, it was about that. I realized that wasn't working for me, even though, we did it a few times and got away with it. There's a statute of limitations, so I'm not worried about that. I wound up catching about 5 more arrests by the time I turned a month shy of my 21st birthday. I turned 21 in the Bronx House of Detention, which no longer exists, thankfully. 21 years old. I remember I was double bunked. I'm in the bottom bunk. There wasn't nobody on top at this point. And as soon as they turned the lights off, my birthday is December 8th. It's December 8th, 1992. I turned 21, and I was just under the covers crying. And I remember that. That was how I spent my 21st birthday, when normally I should have been out partying with my friends. I'm able to now legally, do things, whatever the normal quote unquote thing 21-year-olds do. And what I was doing was fighting, trying to figure my way, surviving, and facing a life prison sentence. I did a year and a half in Rikers Island. During that time, I was able to visit the Bing. This is what we call the box solitary in Rikers Island. It's called the Bing for many reasons. Some of the research is because of all the noise, and that's the noise that winds up ringing in your head. And so folks said that it's called the Bing because of that is the noise that we wind up developing and hearing in our heads, literally, because of all of the noise and all of the stuff that's happening around us. A year and a half in Rikers Island before I wind up copping out to 8 to 24 years, first-time felony offender. Again, I'm 21 years old. I turned 22 on my way upstate. I did the other 12. I wound up doing 14 years in total. I was denied parole 3 times because of the violent nature of my case. No other reason. I wasn't someone that, even though I did go to the box several times, I did keep block time. I never did anything for any kind of violence. It was all around, disobeying direct orders. My initial Bing time in the box, that was different. That was Rikers Island. That was for fighting. Again, I'm very young. I'm trying to survive. But when they sent me to the box, when I went from my first state facility to downstate, I was in Eastern Correction, then I went to downstate 95. It was because we were protesting the double bunk system that was starting. It was because I was a Latin king and they found lessons in my cell. So they gave me 36 days. They kicked me out of the prison. I went from downstate, and from there it was like 10 different prisons. You know, like I said, 14 years. And when I had about 12 years in, really close towards the end of my prison sentence, I was set up by some corrupt COs at Green Haven Correctional Facility when I was in the annex, and they wind up sending me to the box for 4 months at Upstate Correctional Facility. So I did a total of 127 days in a small cell. It was a double bunk cell, but I didn't have a bunkie for long. I had 2 bunkies that lasted a couple of weeks and then they left. But I was mostly by myself in a cell that has a shower in it and a door in the back to open for rec. So literally, most people spent 24 hours in their cell, except for the time they opened the cell, if they opened it for you, because they didn't open it for everybody. All you have to do was make one single noise, do something that the officer or whatever staff member was walking by your door didn't like, and you would get extended time. And it was just horrible, the stuff that I saw. And that's at a minimum. I had a guy next door to me who really suffered from mental health issues. He wound up doing something that was disrespectful to one of the nurses that would come in to give him medication. And the noise that I heard out of there when the goon squad ran up into his cell, it was just horrible. They beat the hell out of this little guy who was like 5 foot tall. And I'll never forget that. And then they took him away and we never heard from him again. So this is the kind of experience. So how did I survive? When you're talking about my background related to this issue in solitary, my time there in solitary, Shelton talked about, how much you could do for a certain amount of time, right? You can only speak to yourself for a certain amount of time. You can only do so much reading. You can only do so much writing. But because I had 12 years at this point, I was very conscious. I mean, I was blessed. I had met mentors. I had a different experience. A minority, of course. I went through 2 college semesters while I was incarcerated, and I was mentored by people who were survivors of the Attica Rebellion of 1971. For those who don't know, please study the Attica Rebellion of 1971 and see how that, first of all, is connected to a national struggle against the prison industrial complex and the abuses that were taking place and the folks that were getting murdered inside prison, like George Jackson. But see how that rebellion sparked all of the programs, the positive programs that came out of that, like the college programs, like the grievance programs, like the NAACP, the Latinos organizations, and all of these different prison-based and prisoner-ran organizations. We were able to have our own religious practices. We were able to have our own classrooms and education. So that's how I did my time during those 12 and a half years upstate. And so when I was incarcerated at this point, like I said, I'm now 12 years into what I thought was going to be a 16-year incarceration, because that was my condition of release in New York State. I exercised every day. As soon as I got up, I read, oh my God, I would read about 6 books a week, easily. And that was the ones that I got from the folks that were coming by from the library and the 2 that you can borrow. But I would get books delivered to me. I would have my own books that I would get out of my property. And that's how I did my time. But again, how much reading and exercising and walking around the cell and speaking to yourself and staring at a wall and writing can you do before you really feel as if you're losing your mind, because I could do all of that, right, in a span of, let's say, 8 hours. I still have another 16 hours to go. And let's say I go to sleep for 4 hours, which is, you're lucky, right, if you can get some sleep, because again, the sensory deprivation that takes place, the lights are always on and off, the noise is constant. You never know what's going to happen, and yet you find community with folks that are there with you. You build with folks who are there, who are screaming lessons and talking things. You learn to fish so you could pass around newspapers and magazines and people could read, And so that's how, I did those last 127 days. Now, mind you, this is 18 plus years I was released from the box. And so when going back to your question, right, how am I connected to this? It's interesting that one of the differences between the Brother Shelton and I is that I've been out of the box for 18 plus years. I've been home 17 plus years. And that'll lead into some of the questions leading forward. So thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it back on to you right there, Christina.
Well, thank you, Stephen, so much for sharing your story. When you think about your experience in solitary confinement, what word would you use to describe it and why?
So the word I'm going to share, it's not my word and it's not my description, it's not my definition, but it is a concept that has been able to build around the national and international and global movement against long-term isolation, and it's torture. Point blank, simply said, torture. And Brother Shelton and I explained some instances and how that could be, but that doesn't even speak to some of the horrors. People getting hung up in their cells, people being denied life-saving medical treatment, mental health treatment, rehabilitation, food. If there's folks in the box right now in certain places across this country and here in this state that are being fed loaves. A loaf, please look that up. And think about a loaf of bread without being chopped up, a loaf of bread, right? With all kinds of gulag and everything, whatever's in the kitchen, all baked up all together, and that is what you're gonna eat. As long as they give you the bare minimum of nutrients or whatever, and that's what they give you to eat as a punishment. So this is another thing that we have to think about. Why torture? Because it's punishment. Solitary is only used as punishment. And when you're in the box, they don't speak to what got you there, even if it is violence. Let's say you, at the very worst, you stab somebody in a fight. At the very worst. Why are they not speaking to why and how do we now get from that to a person that now deals with conflict in a way non-violently? Why don't we give them mental health treatment? Why don't we give them rehabilitative treatment, education, empowerment? None of that exists when you're in the box. None of that, by the way, none of that. No accountability. It's all punishment. And this is not mine. There's an expert, and I want to share this because it's super important in my research, is that following extensive interviews held at the SHU at Pelican Bay in 1993, Dr. Stuart Gracian, a psychiatrist that studies solitary confinement and its effects, he found that solitary confinement induces a psychiatric disorder, which he termed SHU syndrome. And this is characterized by hypersensitivity to extensive stimuli, hallucinations, panic attacks, cognitive deficits, obsessive thinking, paranoia, and a litany of physical and psychological problems. I've gone through every single one of those lists right there. And to this day, I still suffer some of it. Not all of it, because for me, initially, I had a lot of nightmares and flashbacks at the first couple of years after coming home, right? That doesn't happen as much. My nightmares have dissipated over the years. But yet, that's part of my expression and my SHU syndrome. So torture, again, why do I call it that? It's not just mine. The United Nations, and I'm the professor, I don't want to spend too much, but there's folks out of the United Nations that also study this. People studying and working in civil rights, in human rights, in public health, in mental health. You know, SHU syndrome is real. I was released from the box in February of 2004. I've been home since October 2006. I was on parole for 3 years. Successful. My last parole officer said, "Stephen, parole is not for you. You're in college, you're married, I was an honor student. Three semesters, perfect 4.0s, going full-time, Dean's List, twice in a row, awards from the social work department. And yet, okay, married, you know, college, career, and yet my marriage ended after 12 years. I wasn't in therapy. I wasn't processing all of my trauma as I would. I was doing all the stuff that I was telling you was super great and successful, doing great. And I ignored a lot of my own trauma and therapy because I was so overworked. I was so overwhelmed with the responsibilities, and I just didn't pay attention. I would self-isolate, you know. And since my release in 2006, I have been unhoused 3 times. One time I was unhoused as the assistant director of an alternative incarceration program. And I'm living in a basement with my friend without literally running a program. You know, I was experiencing emotions. This happened after my separation and upcoming divorce. I was experiencing emotions for the first time as an adult. I didn't experience this because I got locked up starting at 14. I was locked up from 20 to 34. And so I didn't have the opportunity to develop and go through these emotions as folks normally go through it. And so what happened? I just developed, oh my God, like a huge depression. I get overwhelmed still with sadness out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. All of a sudden, it's like, boom, I'm like fighting a ball. Sorry. This is, lifelong. And that's what I need folks to see, that it's lifelong. It's not, and I am someone who I have 2 undergraduate degrees. I was a case manager for many years. I understand trauma. I'm in healing. I'm a circle keeper, restorative justice. I'm in therapy. I have coaches. I'm a coach myself. Consistently, I meditate. I do things to take care of myself, self-care. And yet, I have to still deal with process 18 plus years later, after 17 plus years in the community, post-incarceration, doing great work. And I'm still experiencing this today. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing about the lasting psychological impacts that solitary confinement can cause. If you want to share any more about that, or if you want to talk about all the advocacy work that you do in solitary confinement and what some of your goals are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm part of 2 national, but we're all in a coalition, national organizations to end solitary confinement across the country. We're representing 22 states in Florida, thanks to the work that we've been doing, LatinoJustice. LatinoJustice is part of the national Unlock the Box campaign. Please go on to the Unlock the Box campaign. I'm on the advisory council. I'm an advisory council member of NEARCAT, which is the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, also representing, like I said, 22 states that end solitary. Super successful. They were the ones that were instrumental in ending solitary in New York State, New Jersey, other northeastern states, doing great work out in the West Coast in California, folks in Chicago and Atlanta. Every time we meet regularly, and I'm on meetings with them every week, folks from Nevada, folks from Philly, us in Florida, it's just a great thing to be in community. So when we talk about how do we deal with the trauma of experiencing solitary, it's in community, therapy, coaching, being in solidarity, with other solitary survivors. We are solitary survivors. We meet, we support each other. We went to a retreat just recently, to California and spent some time just healing, processing, having fun, holding each other accountable, planning for the future. And when we talk about that, so the advocacy work, upon arriving here, which is almost 4 years now with LatinoJustice, ending solitary confinement in the state of Florida for the more than 10,000 people who are there every day, 10,000 people held in solitary confinement. That was a priority as soon as we got here from our pillar. It's been a blessing because the position is anchored in Florida, and yet we're Southeast. So I've been able to go to Georgia and do some work. We've been able to work with the Virginia Coalition on Solitary as well. And so we've been doing some work to end solitary in the state of Virginia. But here in Florida, it's from what Brother Shelton shared, and he spoke about the horrors here in the state of Florida. We definitely need to do something with regards to ending the torture in the state. And so we've identified bills, we do fact sheets. I've been able to work with the coalition. Now, like I said, we're part of the Unlock the Box campaign, and our priority is to do workshops, educational workshops, develop draft legislation that we could represent coming up next year, because that's our main priority as here in my position as a justice advocate coordinator. And so because Florida has all these different types of solitary confinement, from all these different names, and this is where I want, the image to come. If I could cue Christina, I'm not sure if we could cue the image that I shared with you, the one and only image that I want people to see and know in this specific presentation.
Yes, I'm going to pull that. Give me a second.
Thank you, Alexis. And it has to do with maximum management. And that's the maximum management reserved for those that they call the extreme security risk. Those that they call the worst of the worst. And this is the image. This is what happens. What they do is what they call the most severe form of confinement, where human beings, individuals, are actually placed in cages. Human beings in a cage. And that's the image. This is something that my supervisor and I have been developing, and it's huge for us. It's like, we need to think about this as a society. This is a moral issue. It's about values. When is it okay to send a human being to a cage? When is it okay to torture human beings? When is it okay? It's never okay. That's the only answer. It's never okay. you know, and so just think about that. Here, right here in the state of Florida, we have human beings that are held in cages, and some of them are children, because we send a lot of children into the prisons, into the adult system in the state of Florida through direct file. So I want to thank you, Christina, and please join on the coalition and help, you know, help us get ready for next session and just to end solitary here in the state of Florida. It's just 10,000 people. It's just 10,000 too much.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing your perspective, and thank you for all the advocacy work that you're doing, because it's really needed here in Florida. I want to turn it over to Andrea. Andrea, could you please introduce yourself in your role as the director of the Florida Institutional Legal Services Project?
Sure. I want to thank Stephen and Pri in particular for just, I mean, you know, it's so powerful and so important for people to understand your experience. So thank you. I direct and thank you, Christina. The students are awesome. I've been working with the students at FSU and Dr. Anino for years, it feels like, maybe a decade, on some of these issues. So thank you for your dedication. I direct our institutional legal services project at Florida Legal Services. I do sort of a combination of civil rights advocacy, impact litigation, and community lawyering, which Stephen talked a little bit about, all around issues of mass incarceration and our criminal legal system, and trying to figure out how to work with grassroots groups to develop solutions as alternatives to locking people in cages and giving people the things that they need to live. So thank you. I don't know, Christina, if you want to just frame what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, if you could please share with us some of the data that we do have on solitary confinement and describe some of the legal cases that have been fought or are currently being fought against solitary confinement.
Definitely. So Alexis, I'll just let you know. You want to go to the next thing? So I'm just going to break it up a little bit so you don't have to look at me the whole time. So solitary confinement, like our folks talked about, is, you know, goes by a lot of different names, but the conditions all kind of share similar deprivations of basic human needs, right? No environmental stimulation, nothing to do, right? Artificial lighting all the time, lack of normal human interaction. You know, Pri talked about someone handing you a tray through a slot in a door is not a normal human interaction. And, you know, getting out only briefly, maybe to take a shower if you're lucky, very unsanitary, and lack of personal property, right? Very limited visitation if you get any, in very cramped cells. And generally, if there's a window, it's covered, right? So you can't see outside, you can't see the sun, feel the air. So these are a couple, I just wanted to kind of ground us in a legal framework that many of us who do litigation like this use. You know, solitary confinement can also be being in some type of housing situation with another person too, that's recognized as solitary confinement. And all of the research, studies, science, professional standards, right, that are rooted in disciplines of mental health, corrections, say that science, you know, that solitary confinement poses a risk of harm, serious psychological harm, physical harm to anyone. And that risk is more pronounced for certain people, but everyone is subject to this risk. So you want to go next one, Alexis? So wanted to just kind of show folks one of our cases that I'm going to talk about. So this is the Department of Juvenile Justice Detention Center, secure detention center, where children are held, you know, either awaiting their charges or also, you know, after their charges are adjudicated and they're waiting to go to a juvenile prison. You can go to the next one. This is what we're talking about, you know, and I just have to show you, this is like before we showed up for our expert tour. So they didn't even clean this up. So this is what we're talking about. And if you can imagine being, you know, you can't, right? 13 years old and locked in here. That's, you know, that's what we're talking about. So next slide. So I'm going to talk about data, which I think Stephen, Pri, like your experiences are what make data powerful, because we can talk about data all day long until we're blue in the face, but people's personal experience is what shows what the impact is, right? And what we need to change and what the abuses are. So this is just to give you a snapshot. I mean, I think, you know, I talk a lot about children. For those people that may know me, I spend a lot of time with kids in different kinds of correctional settings. And so, you know, what always strikes me is the racial disproportionality of who's getting arrested, who's getting prosecuted, who's getting pushed further into the system, to the deepest end of the criminal legal system, and how many children we arrest in the state of Florida. Not we, the powers that be. Stephen mentioned that, and how young these folks are, right? And the trauma and the damage that is happening to people as children when all of this is going on. So next one. So let's talk about data. So the litigation that I'm going to talk about, we had a series of great, fantastic experts, national experts on solitary confinement and how to not do solitary confinement, right? There are other ways to work with children that don't involve locking them in a cage for extended periods of time. And so this was, you know, a snapshot of a lot of the data that we got. And I have to say, our data is hard fought. I think some of my colleagues are on here. You know, it is hard to get this in litigation. They don't want to give it to you. There's a reason they don't want to give it to you. They don't want us to use it. They don't want us to make it publicly available. They don't want us to talk about it. So I think all of this, you know, what this communicates is some different things, right? So this is several year period in the Department of Juvenile Justice and Secure Detention. And you look at this, the number of kids isolated, right, in solitary confinement, and the number of times that it's used. Notice that those numbers don't match, right? So this means that what we found is 50 to 60% of the kids who were getting put in solitary confinement, which the department calls behavioral confinement, right? It's a nice word for saying what Stephen described and what Pri described. You know, these kids are spending 50 to 60% of them are spending more than one time in solitary confinement. Over 30% of them are spending 3 or more times in solitary confinement. And this is during the same period that you're locked up for about 14 days. So most of these kids are spending an incredible amount of time in solitary confinement. When we challenged the department's practices and policies, there was no maximum time limit. So there was no upper limit on how long a child could be put in isolation. And this is all incredibly dangerous, right? There are lots of studies showing that there's an immediate risk of suicide, especially for young people, children, adolescents, locked in solitary confinement. Doesn't take into account all of the science. Like, we have a robust body of science at this point that says this is harmful to human beings, right? And that kids continue to develop, young people continue to develop their brains socially, physiologically up through the age of 25. And so, and it's contrary to national standards that say, you know, there are other ways to address behavior, right? And Stephen was talking about some of those, right? Circles, positive interactions, positive interventions with young people, right? So let's go to the next one, Alexis. So I want to talk a little bit about the Department of Corrections. Again, shout out to my colleague Kelly Knapp, if you're on here, who led our litigation team. So hard fought, again, to get data. And this shows you a little bit of change, right, in the number of folks getting locked in different forms of isolation or solitary confinement in the Department of Corrections. Pri talked about some of the different names it goes by, but there are a bunch of different forms of isolation that occur, solitary confinement in the Department of Corrections. But there was a little bit of movement here, right? A little bit of downward movement in the number of people being put in solitary. And we filed our litigation. I was part of a team of awesome people and awesome clients, very brave folks, in May 2019. So we can't take total credit, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the numbers are going down as we're involved in impact litigation. So you want to go to the next one. So, this is just another snapshot of some additional data. And this is why I think the data is, you can go to the next one, Alexis, so powerful is because it, who is in solitary confinement in the Department of Corrections? And this is very important, right? To understand folks have additional things that make them more vulnerable to the risk of harm from solitary confinement, and who those folks are, right? So that's just another piece of it, ways that we use the information that we get in order to support people's stories and personal experience, and bring our claims and prove our case. The next one, Alexis. So this one, I think it's important, and I think Stephen and Pri touched on this, when you represent someone in solitary confinement as a lawyer or an advocate, you're not just dealing with the solitary confinement, right? We see our clients holistically. They are people, and all of these things, like Pri was saying, all of these things are more prevalent, more disturbing. I don't know, horrible. I don't even know the words to use, right? When you're in solitary confinement. So it's just a way to understand, folks, we spend a lot of time trying to get people, we're litigating this case, we're trying to get all these folks relief that for thousands of people. But in the meantime, we have to think about people are suffering. How do we get them to some more services, right? To an alternative mental health setting so that they can maybe get some relief from the harm that they're experiencing. Okay, you can go to the next one, Alexis. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple pieces of our litigation that I was involved in. GH was filed as a class action on behalf of 4,000 children who are isolated in solitary confinement every year in secure detention settings in the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. It involved all 21 detention centers in the state of Florida. And I just want to say something. Our kids who brought this lawsuit are some of the bravest little ones I have ever met. They were 13 and 16 when we filed this case. And they were so motivated, they wanted to not just tell what happened to them, they wanted to change it for everybody else too. So our cases, I'm going to talk about GH and I'm going to talk about Harvard, which was sort of a similar case in the Department of Corrections that I was part of a team that litigated, bringing Eighth Amendment claims, cruel and unusual punishment, right? Because solitary confinement, when the Department of Juvenile Justice or the Florida Department of Corrections has this kind of policy, practice, or custom, as we call it, of isolating people in solitary confinement, it poses a substantial risk of serious harm in violation of the Eighth Amendment. And then we also had some claims under the Americans with Disabilities Act, because many folks who end up in the box or the cage have disabilities. And so, trying to think about setting up systems where people have some way to have their disabilities accommodated. And for children, we said the accommodation was, don't put them in there, right? That's the accommodation. So the impact, and I just want to say, these are some things that we did. And I think it's important to note because, neither of these cases resulted in a big fancy settlement or a court judgment that I can show you, but we changed a lot of things, and our clients, right, the kids, changed a lot of things. And so this is important to understand. We did lower the number of kids going into isolation and solitary confinement, the overall amount of time that children were spending, increasing programs. These places are decades old. They're horrible. They're old. They're falling apart. They're dirty, nasty, as my one client liked to call it. So it's just, this is what, trying to make some, it's like putting lipstick on a pig a little bit, but trying to make some changes so that if folks have to be in here, at least it is a little bit better, right? And really centering the children in them being able to talk about what was happening. So you can go to the next one. Shout out to Melissa Duncan. I saw you on here, but I have to go through this. Can you go to the next one, Alexis? Next one. So there are a couple cases I don't have time to talk about, but they're in the slides. You can read about them and read the cases. So Harvard, this was filed as a class action to challenge the Florida Department of Corrections policy, practice, or custom of isolating people in solitary confinement for 22 to 24 hours a day. Similar claims as in the GH case. And these were sort of companion cases that the same teams were litigating at the same time. And so we were sharing a lot of information and strategy. We didn't win Harvard. I don't know what people call a win. I call a win when you actually like stand in solidarity with impacted people who are trying to fight to change oppression. But here's some of the things that that happened as a result of this litigation. And I think one of the things that touched me the most was making connections with people and just meeting with people, talking with people, humanizing folks, right? Some of the folks that we met with hadn't touched another person, right? When you shake someone's hand in years. And so, being able to allow these folks who are experiencing so much pain on an everyday basis, being able to tell the truth about what's happening, tell it to a judge, tell it to the press, right? Tell it like it is. And we, got a lot of information that is, we're trying to get it together to make it available to other folks doing similar work and advocacy. We pushed the department to follow some of its own rules. Never, well, I'm not going to go there. So, and then opening up some alternatives, right? Pushing the Department of Corrections to say, okay, you have admitted that all these folks are suffering from serious mental illness because of solitary confinement and all of these harms that are occurring. So open up some alternatives in alternative mental health settings to get folks out, right? It's, again, these are not solutions, right? But these are things that are going to make life better and reform these things a little bit more as long as we still have prisons. So you can go to the next one, Alexis. Some of the things that, I call them better practices because I think when it comes to prisons, there are no good practices. These are some of the things that have evolved from litigation, from legislative work, Unlock the Box campaign, right? Stephen was talking about. These are all things that, what as a community, right, as a society, we've started to recognize, right? These are more humane ways to treat people if they have to be incarcerated. And then where are we headed? So you can go to the next one, Alexis. So this is where I think we're headed. And I do a lot of work with grassroots groups and organizers. We can do impact litigation, legislative reform, like the ones we're talking about that the students wrote and are trying, we're trying as a coalition to get it passed, sharing better practices. Some of the organizing Stephen was talking about and the work that Pri's doing, community organizing, transformative justice, restorative justice. If you don't know what those words mean, look them up. And the press, getting this information out, making it publicly available. So prisons and jails are not held in secret, right? People are not held in secret. People understand what is happening inside these places and the level of abuse. And then I think one of the most important things is, getting people who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system speaking out about their experiences, taking collective action, right? And that needs to be what grounds and centers our legal work and our advocacy. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for sharing your perspective as a litigator. I know we have until 1:30, but I would like to turn it over to Professor Coonan. If you could please,
Sure.
if you could please introduce yourself and a bit about your role as Executive Director of the FSU Center for the Advancement of Human Rights.
Certainly. Thank you, Christina. Thanks to everyone else on the panel here. It's a privilege to join you. My name is Terry Coonan. I am an immigration and human rights attorney by practice, worked in that field for about 30 years now. I serve as the executive director of the FSU Center for the Advancement of Human Rights, where solitary confinement, especially of children and immigrants, has been a huge human rights priority and concern for us. So that is our entree into this field that, again, all of you as experts have testified on so credibly.
Thank you. Could you describe how the international human rights perspective views solitary confinement?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I love that this panel started with the voices of survivors, of Pri and of Stephen. Thank you so much for that testimony. And it speaks very strongly to the human rights world, because the human rights movement, human rights law, is actually quite unique in that it's based on the voices of victims and survivors. It's based on the voices of great people like Pri and like Stephen, that actually finally have made their way up to the highest levels of the legal world, the international world. What the UN has done recently is very, very important in terms of how we deal with solitary confinement. It's striking that Stephen used the word torture. That is absolutely the framework that the United Nations and the international human rights movement now addresses the whole experience of solitary confinement. It was back in 2011 that the UN turned to a quite remarkable advocate, Juan Mendez, who was, again, a leader in the field, a survivor of torture in Argentina. He had worked for decades in the field. One of the very final positions he held was Special Rapporteur of Torture for the United Nations. And it's not any accident that the final emphasis of his work was looking at solitary confinement as a source of torture. In 2011, he issued what was a landmark report to the United Nations, where he assessed how could solitary confinement almost always amount to inhuman and degrading treatment, but especially could it in many circumstances amount to torture. The things that Pri and Stephen have described clearly rise to the level of torture. The intentional infliction of severe physical or emotional distress. That is now the framework that the international human rights movement addresses this whole experience of solitary confinement. What's been striking for me is to see the way that what we call our regional human rights courts, the Inter-American Court for Human Rights in San Jose, Costa Rica, it deals with all the Americas. The European Court for Human Rights deals with every country in Europe, and the new African Court for Human and People's Rights. All of them are addressing solitary confinement. All of them are finding that, again, it should never be used on juveniles, on minors. That's an absolute prohibition that should be out there. All of them are noting that the ways that it's actually used amount to almost always abusive and, again, basically inhuman situations, and that in a great many contexts, it amounts to torture. The UN in 2015 issued what they called the Mandela Rules. Stephen and Andrea have also talked about those. Those were really important rules because they were done in a human rights framework. The United Nations officially said, we now have minimum standards. We had earlier ones from 1955, but by 2015, the UN said it's a human rights framework that we will use to assess this. They said that anytime that solitary confinement is used over 15 days or more, it constitutes torture. There should be, again, an absolute prohibition on how it's actually used in any kind of situation that involves minors. What's striking is that I see regional human rights courts, and that court in Costa Rica, we don't officially recognize it in the United States. Why is that? Because it constantly calls us to task, and it points out that we are often outliers in the United States for our failure to observe basic human rights. They've looked at Pelican Bay in California, Stephen mentioned that, where there had been extreme uses of this kind of abusive solitary confinement. They looked at Connecticut and a number of other states. They have, with great credibility, pointed out that this is a huge human rights issue. It's a huge international human rights issue here in the United States. As Andrea notes, it's a huge issue in Florida, when 25% of our children that are detained have at some point been put into solitary confinement. That's simply unacceptable. When at any given day, about 10% of our entire prison population in Florida is held in solitary confinement, absolutely unacceptable by human rights standards, by any kind of moral standards as well. Going forward, I think that will be the challenge for all of us. That is certainly the kind of support that international human rights law wants to bring to Stephen, to Pri, and to actually our entire country. I love the fact that Andrea closed on the notion of community. That is absolutely what we need to be about. It's about bringing back people. It's about not inflicting even more damage on children. Very fortunately, just this month, Senators Durbin and Schatz introduced a new bill in Congress that would abolish solitary confinement in our immigration facilities. This is an area where our Human Rights Center at FSU has done a great deal of work over the years. That ICE has actually used solitary confinement routinely, not as an exception, not as a final kind of recourse. They've used it routinely against our immigrant population. And the other area where our Human Rights Center continues to do a great deal of work is with child trafficking victims. In our experience, especially of U.S. citizen children, they're our largest pool of sex trafficking victims. Almost all of them have at some point been subjected to some form of incarceration that most often use some kind of solitary confinement. And the reason for that, these are children that are deeply traumatized. And it's the trauma acting out that allows our system to say, oh, they're disruptive, they're behavioral problems. Therefore, they have to be actually put into some form of solitary confinement. Legally, morally, but even clinically, there couldn't be a worse kind of advocacy or a worse kind of practice. We damage even more the very children that are currently damaged. Many of those children are now being detained under what we call masking charges. Florida, since 2013, doesn't prosecute children for prostitution, but we are still arresting and detaining children on a host of other kinds of criminal charges that oftentimes mask the fact that they're child trafficking victims as well. So for a host of reasons, and again, it's just a privilege to join the group of people that are really change agents here on this panel to say that the human rights world has a dog in your fight, and we hope to support the ongoing efforts that you're making. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Coonan. I have another question for you. How can we work to improve conditions in Florida's prisons to comply with international human rights laws? And can we use international organizations as a vehicle to address this issue?
Absolutely. Professor Anino and I have actually both testified in front of the Florida legislature trying to get a prohibition of solitary confinement of children put into our state constitution. We protect fetal pigs in that constitution. Why is it that we can't protect our children as well? And I'm a big believer as a human rights advocate, as one who teaches courses on human rights, on human trafficking, we need to bring international standards into US law. There's historically been resistance to that, but it's no accident. Even the Supreme Court, when they reassessed whether we should condemn children to death or whether we should hold children in prison for life, what they've actually referred to are evolving standards of decency. And by that, they mean human rights standards. So I am a huge believer that those international human rights standards have to better inform our laws, and international human rights groups can be great supporters for the work that we do here in the United States and in Florida.
Thank you, Professor Coonan. I know we're about 5 minutes until time. We might have time for maybe one Q&A question. But I just wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their perspectives and expertise. As we've heard, solitary confinement, as it's used in Florida, violates international human rights law and causes inhumane and lasting damage. And we're still pushing for legislative reform in Florida, and we're pushing for a more detailed study, because as Andrea talked about, there's data, but they don't necessarily want to share it or study it. But if you'd like to help, our call to action is if you could call or message Senate and House leadership and ask them to approve an OPAGA study on solitary confinement, or just call your legislator and let them know that you care about abolishing solitary confinement in Florida. I know we had a question in the Q&A, might be good to close out on. How can we form a more collaborative movement to end solitary confinement? If anyone would like to answer.
I can tell you that one of the most humbling and greatest experiences has been going to Virginia and doing a legislative advocacy and storytelling training specifically to end solitary in Virginia to all directly impacted, formerly incarcerated, mothers of children who are incarcerated, grandmothers of people, and to see them as soon as session started, this is 2 years in a row now, go to lobby and advocate with their, with their delegates. Virginia's experience, again, the Virginia Coalition on Solitary is part of the Unlock the Box campaign, and so to see there that in 3 years they were able to get a bill to the governor's desk in 3 years. Of course, he vetoed it. This is this session, but it was a great experience, and I that coalition taught me that we are part of more than just ending the 10,000 here. We're talking about 122,000 across the US and sometimes more, because if you lock down Red Onion State Prison in Virginia, with its everyone that's there, if you lock down one prison, then that number jumps from 122,000 to even up to 200,000, depending. And a lockdown happens a lot of times if you're in the max. So what I've learned and what worked when it comes to coalition work is just being able to connect with them and seeing what they're working and having us work together. Think nationally but work locally. It's definitely the theme.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you again, all of you, for taking time to talk about your experiences and perspectives and sharing your powerful stories. Before everyone leaves, make sure there's a resource list in the chat that has talking points, more information that all of our panelists have added, links to our bills, and other ways that you can get involved in advocacy. I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, I'm sure you could reach out to any of us. But we really appreciate all of your time being here. Thank you.
And before we sign off completely, last minute housekeeping, of course, I did drop the CLE code for, our Florida barred attorneys, or also sometimes credit can be awarded in other jurisdictions. You can reach out to me and I can try to help you with that. But that CLE code is 24035009, N as in Nancy. If you can't get it down right now, don't worry. You will receive an email from Zoom in 24 hours with that a copy of the recording, the CLE information, and the resource list that was just mentioned. If you do not receive that email from Zoom, because sometimes it goes to spam or sometimes it doesn't go through, you are more than welcome to email me. My email is up at the top of the chat, alexis.bartholomew@floridalegal.org. And before we officially sign off, I just want to say thank you all so much. I'm going to quickly repost your email, Christina, into the chat for everybody. That went through just to the hosts. I'm going to put it in for everybody because I think you meant to send it to participants too. I just want to thank you all for allowing me to share a platform with you. I'm truly honored, and I really just am motivated to see what our future holds with incredible people like you spearheading and fighting every day to make this a better place. So thank you very much. And with that, I will end our Zoom. Everybody have a good rest of your day and carry on.
Thank you, Alexis.
Bye.